Collier County Sheriff's Office.
We're tracking breaking news.
Well, breaking just into our newsroom.
Unfolding tonight in the investigation of
Sheriff L.J. Thorpe served as Collier Sheriff from 1928 to 1954. His major focus was locating moonshine stills hidden in the backwoods and in the Everglades. Within the first 8 months of his term, he brought more than 80 cases before the courts, doubling previous records. January 31st, 1965, 25,000 people visit the grand opening of Mackel Island to see the Mackel brothers' bold new concept of a waterfront community. The three Mackel brothers, Frank Jr., Elliot, and Robert, dominated the Florida development world as owners of a $65 million empire. December of 1968, the Mackel family received grim news that Robert's 20-year-old daughter had been kidnapped. She was driven to a wooded area 20 miles north of Atlanta, where she was ordered to get into a pre-dug hole and coffin. Polaroids were taken of her holding a sign that said kidnapped. Then they put the lid on the coffin, screwed it shut, and shoveled dirt on top of her. Barbara has been buried alive in the woods. Her kidnappers demanded a $500,000 ransom, which her parents immediately complied with. 8 days later, Barbara was found safe. Gary Christ and Ruth Eisman Shear are responsible for the kidnapping of Barbara Mackel. Barbara Mackel's story was turned into 2 movies and a book called 83 Hours Till Dawn. Ruth was the first woman on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. She was sentenced to 7 years in prison, paroled after 4 years, and deported to Honduras. Gary Christ was sentenced to life in prison, but released on parole after 10 years. Local residents turned to illegal activities to support their families.
The arrests began shortly before sunrise. By midday today, 23 people were taken into custody. Hundreds of law enforcement officers had set up a blockade around Everglades City. The Drug Enforcement Administration says this community of 700 people is the hub of an international marijuana smuggling ring, that boatmen here unloaded drugs from mother vessels and helped distribute them throughout the country. Over the past 2 years, drug agents have made more than 100 arrests and over $140 million in drug seizures in this area.
25 years after he was arrested, one of the lead smugglers, Tim McBride, published a book about the rise and fall of a marijuana empire called Saltwater Cowboy. Also in 1983, 3 men charged with the slaying of 33-year-old Collier Sheriff Deputy Emeritus Q. Howell III in Immokalee. Raimundo Reyes, Miguel Sori, Ernesto Suarez, and 2 juveniles were being pursued by Deputy Howell for robbing a convenience store. The getaway car collided with a parked car, and Howell suffered a fatal bullet wound to the chest when he exited his patrol car. All 3 adults were sentenced to life in prison. Stephen Benson blew up his family in a Chevy Suburban in August 1985. 2 explosions rocked the exclusive Quail Creek neighborhood. His sister, Carol, 42, survived as she crawled from the car before the second bomb detonated. Scarred for life, she testified against him in the jury trial held in Lee County. One of the prosecutors, Dwight Brock, shown here, later would serve as Collier's clerk of the court for 26 years. Trial Judge Hugh Hayes went on to be the longest-serving judge in Collier County, retiring in 2022. Benson was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison. He died in 2015 after being shanked by another inmate. Also in 1985, 21-year-old George Hill lived in Naples Manor and was arrested December of '85 for the brutal murder of Marion M. Lyle. Her body was discovered in November by her husband in the temporary employment office operated by the couple. Lying on her back, clothes removed, she had been brutally beaten, stomped, choked, and strangled. Sentenced to life in prison, George Hill is still serving his time. September 1986. A group of men kidnapped 9-year-old Amanda Mueller from the Community School of Naples and held her for ransom. Amanda is the great-granddaughter of the founder of the Mueller Noodle Company, and her father, John Mueller, is president of the Naples-based Mueller Company Realty. Her parents left $1.5 million as instructed, but it was never picked up. 5 days later, Amanda was found alive in a cardboard box in the woods at 951 and Rattlesnake. Edward O'Brien, 38, Richard Sy, 29, Peter Farrell, 37, and Paul Farrell, 22, are all responsible for the kidnapping of Amanda Mueller. O'Brien was acquitted, stating he had no knowledge of the abduction. Sy's charges were dropped because there wasn't enough evidence of his participation in the kidnapping. The Farrell brothers admitted to the abduction, but said it was concocted by Amanda's father as a way to resolve marital problems. Paul Farrell was arrested at his own wedding reception, and both brothers were found guilty of extortion and extortion conspiracy by a federal jury in 1987 and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Peter Farrell was released at age 73 in September of 2010. His brother Paul was released at age 58 in April of 2006. 5 a.m. 3 employees are working at the Naples Cracker Barrel restaurant, but before the doors would open, all 3 employees would be dead. 2 former employees enter the restaurant, tie up the employees, and slit their throats. Brandy Bain Jennings and Charles Graves are responsible for the brutal murders of Dorothy Siddle, Vicki Smith, and Jason Wiggins. Jennings was sentenced to 3 separate death sentences, and his appeal 27 years later has been denied. Jennings is now 53 years old. Graves was sentenced to life in prison. ESPN founder Bill Rasmussen unveiled plans for a first-of-its-kind golf stadium. The project was named Stadium Naples. But the project fell apart after an investigation in 1997 involving 10 people, 4 public officials, 5 business leaders, and an attorney. But after years of investigations, the result was not a 12,000-seat stadium, but rather an 80-seat courtroom. Charges were brought against 10 people, 4 public officials, 5 business leaders, and an attorney, facing sentences ranging from probation to 15 years. Today, Stadium Naples is known as the worst public corruption scandal in local history. Homeowners of Naples Estates off Rattlesnake file a lawsuit against the owners of the park after discovering it sold to another buyer. The Homeowners Association has first right of refusal to buy the 75-acre park. The homeowners won in court and had the right to buy the park for $14.4 million. The ruling was appealed, but upheld by the appeals court. However, the sale never happened. The homeowners were unable to close on the property by the October 2015 deadline due to a mortgage the owner took out and defaulted on to the tune of over $20 million. The 18-year lawsuit is the longest court case in Collier's history. John Ballard rocked Golden Gate City in March of '99 with the bludgeoning deaths of 17-year-old Jennifer Jones and 22-year-old Will Patton Jr. Their bodies were found in their duplex on 55th Terrace Southwest by Jennifer's father. The killings continued in November when Ballard's sister and her husband were discovered badly beaten in their residence on 46th Street Southwest. His sister survived, but her husband passed away due to blunt injury to the head. 1 month later, a former roommate of Ballard's sister was found beaten to death off Hunter Boulevard. Ballard and his sister were arrested an hour later at the corner of 50th Street and 28th Avenue, but not for murder, drug charges. It took investigators 2 years to secure evidence to arrest Ballard for 2 counts of first-degree murder. In March of '03, Ballard was found guilty and sentenced to death row. However, 2 years later, the Florida Supreme Court unanimously overturned the conviction, finding there was no evidence to Ballard's fingerprints in the room and no eyewitnesses to the crime. February 24th, 3 years later, he walked out of prison a free man. A 12-year marriage with 5 children is shattered when 33-year-old Misak Damas murdered his entire family in their Stratford Place home and fled to Haiti.
Did you kill them?
Yes, I did.
Why?
Only God knows.
8 months prior to the murders, Damas was arrested for domestic violence battery against his wife. Questions of competency caused significant delays in the trial, but finally in 2017, Damas was sentenced to 6 death sentences. Three parents filed a lawsuit against the Collier County School Board. The lawsuit alleged the closed-door textbook selection meetings in the 2016-2017 school year violated the Sunshine Law. The case was dismissed by a Collier Circuit judge, but the parents appealed the judge's decision with the 2nd District Court of Appeals and won. However, the school board took it to the Florida Supreme Court to dispute. The Supreme Court refused to take up an appeal and did not explain their reasons for declining to hear the case. This means the 2nd District Court of Appeals ruling stands and the school board violated the open government law because the public was shut out of the meetings of the committees. Thousands of civil and criminal cases are heard in court each year. These cases are only a few of the most notorious cases over the past 100 years of Collier's history.